Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tony Bergantino. I'm the acting director of the Wyoming State Climate Office and the Water Resources Data System. And thank you for joining us for this December Wyoming Conditions and Outlooks webinar, which is put together this month by my office, along with the University of Wyoming Extension and USDA Northern Plains Climate Hub, Natural Resources Conservation Service, US Geological Survey, and the National Weather Service. As before, this update will look at current climate conditions and snowpack, followed by surface water status, weather forecasts and outlooks, and we'll finish it up with how you can participate and help out in the drought monitoring process. So looking at current conditions, this is the current drought monitor map. For the benefit of those who are joining us for the first time today, this is a weekly product that is updated for each Tuesday, and it's released each Thursday morning. So this one just came out early this morning. These areas circled in green here are areas where we've had some improvement by one or more categories since our last webinar. And these improvements are primarily in areas that received some decent snows over the last week or so, and where there was some subsequent soil moisture improvement. But unfortunately, we also have some red outlined areas here where continued precipitation deficits have led to some further degradations in the drought categories that are shown here. Moving on, this is the 14-day precipitation statewide as a percentile. This is the precipitation over the last 2 weeks, and shows some areas of concern here in Fremont, down here, Lincoln, Sweetwater County border area, and then up here on the Bighorns on the western side. Above median, though, we've had some pretty good swaths down here along the southern part of the state, and the eastern plains have received well above normal precipitation, in fact, approaching the 95th, 98th higher percentile in terms of that. So that's good. Looking at this exact same thing, but for 90 days instead of 2 weeks, we're still seeing some good precipitation here in the central eastern part of the state. And looking back at the longer time frame, you can see some of these deficits standing out a little bit more here in the winds and in the northwest part of the state, especially some of these higher elevation areas here. But a good portion of the state is above the median, at least in terms of numeric precipitation. This is a look at the standardized precipitation index. And again, for those of you who are new here and maybe unfamiliar with this product, the standardized precipitation index, or the SPI, takes precipitation totals over various time intervals going back through time, whether it's 30 days, 60, 6 months, or a year, and fits them into a normal distribution. As an example, for a 30-day SPI, we'd look at precipitation totals for currently, we'd look for like the 16th of November through the 15th of December, yesterday, for each year, and then see how that date range for this year compares to the historical record we just calculated. And from how those values are distributed, we can see how far from how far the current value is from the median or middle value, and then calculate the probability that that value should occur, which makes the SPI a very useful tool for determining drought categories, since the drought categories in the US Drought Monitor are based on how often a particular condition occurs. For example, we would expect on average that conditions corresponding to D2 or the severe drought category would occur about once every 10 to 20 years. So by looking at what recurrence interval and what we're seeing there, it gives us a good hand in coming up with the categories that are depicted. And these maps show the 30 and 60, and then or 30-60 day, along with 1 year down here on the right. And while the center of the state here is showing some nice wetness at the 60 days, you can see that a lot of that here on the left in 30 days has disappeared. And that's because a lot of this was from that October snows, which, with look at the time frame of only 30 days, we're not seeing that show up here anymore. So we're seeing some areas of concern starting to emerge here in these red areas. So these will be areas to keep an eye on in the short term going forward. These are, again, a 2-week period, looking at the 14-day average minimum temperature. This is the absolute temperature here on the upper right, and the departure from normal or average down here on the lower left. And you can see up here looking at the actual temperatures that all our lows are now below the freezing mark over the last two weeks. And we're looking at coldest up in the real high elevations, and then this big pocket up here in Sublette County extending down into Sweetwater County is one of the cooler areas, getting down with average lows being under 15 degrees or thereabouts. And looking at the departure from normal, definitely on the warm side the last 2 weeks, 9 to 12 degrees above average in the Northwest here, Upper Green down into Sweetwater, Lincoln, Fremont County. And then this area here in Carbon and into the Laramie area, the lower elevations, at least the lower of the Laramie area, still up into the hitting the 12 degrees above average, with the rest of the state primarily between 6 and 9 degrees above average, with some smaller pockets here that are a little bit cooler. But by and large, warm across the entire state the last 2 weeks compared to average. This is the same thing, but looking at the maximum temperatures over the last 2 weeks, looking at the absolute values, higher elevations, less than 32 at night. Fremont County again standing out as rather warm here in the upper 40s, even hitting 50s here up against the winds, as well as Platte, Goshen, Laramie, up into the east central part of the state, seeing temperatures, high temperatures during the day up into the low 50s or thereabouts. Looking at this as a departure from normal over here on the bottom left, you can see again Fremont County standing out with departure from average of 12 to 15 degrees or more up in here, along with Sweetwater County, again the Laramie Valley here, or in Albany County, and then Laramie County extending up into Goshen, and Platte County is also seeing 9 to 12 degrees above the average. The remainder of the state, anywhere between 3 and 9 degrees above average. So the maximum temperatures over the last 2 week period were also well above normal. And it's only here in the last few days that we've seen that sort of start to dip down. There's a comparison of soil moisture from 2 weeks ago compared to yesterday's values. We're starting to lose ground up here in the north, especially up in the northwest, but some expansion of this 2 to 5 percentile here. You can see it's extending further south in today's map compared to 2 weeks ago. About the only areas where we've seen improvement are some areas down here in the southwest, where we've moved this 10 to 20 percentile is sort of receded a little bit up into the upper green here, and the 30 to 40 has sort of expanded a little bit to the east. And the area over here in east central Wyoming has also seen some improvement, but by and large, we're real concerned about this more emerging dryness up here in the north, and then the expanding down here in the southeast, where we're also at 5 to 10% of normal. And we'll just take a look at a few of the inputs that go into the drought monitor. We're looking at 90-day precipitation as a percentile, and then also as a standardized precipitation index. And then looking at that in the center column here over 1 year period. And then you can see again, the soil moisture is getting kind of concerning up here in the north, especially in the northwest, and starting to come down here into Campbell and Sheridan County. And you can see some of that reflected down here in the drought monitor map, where we have the extreme drought still lingering here, and in the Johnson, Sheridan, Campbell area. And then recently we've had the expansion of the extreme drought down here in the southwest or southeastern portion of the state. And that's kind of corresponding to somewhat this area here, where we're seeing that 5 to 10 percentile in the soil moisture. You can even see, depending on your monitor, you can see a little bit of finger of this 2 to 5 percentile starting to emerge here in the southeast as well. And Jim Fahey will talk a little bit more, or talk actually a lot more about snow later, but I did want to touch on a couple of points here, particularly related to the lower elevation plains snows, which you can see have improved quite a bit over here, showing up a lot better on the map from today versus 2 weeks ago. And you can see the higher elevations holding fairly steady in some of these areas. But the big takeaway here is that we're starting to see some of this plain snow start to form and hopefully stay there a little bit. Move on to some soil moisture and temperature, and there's currently a project underway to get a better handle on lower elevation that is less than about 5,500 foot snowpack as well as soil moisture. And this project was born largely from the floods in 2011, and we have begun to install stations with automated snow depth sensors as well as soil moisture sensors, and have 2 of those sites are operational in the Upper Missouri River Basin, as well as one here in Laramie, which is outside the project area, but we're using that for equipment testing and such. And also, while not part of that specific project, the state engineer's office has been quite instrumental in getting up additional data points by adding sensors to their stations as well. And we'll see in a minute or so. They've now got 5 stations equipped with probes to measure soil moisture and temperature at depths of 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 75, and 100 centimeters. And so this graph here is of snow depth over the last week or so at our pilot station in Sheridan. We actually got a little bit before this. We started up around 7 inches after the first bit came down. A little bit of melting. You can see the bump up, melting again, and then we pretty good drop off here, which we'll see in a second the reasons for. And now we're running around at about a ½ inch. We also will have cameras mounted on these stations pointed at least at a snow stake, and hopefully also to get cardinal directions, but we can have the snow stake for verification that make sure that these numbers here on the chart are actually reflected on the ground. So sort of an initial quick quality control. But looking at this drop here, moving on to the next slide, you can see we had some pretty nice temperatures there over that period of time, and along with some very low humidities compared to what we had been seeing. But soil moisture, as a result, we would get a little bit of bump up here, 1 to 2%, a little bit of a rise here. But by and large, a lot of that did not go into the soil, or we've not seen it appear there yet. With that snow cover coming off, the blanket of snow that was sort of insulating the ground is disappearing, and we're starting to see the soil temperature go down at the initial depths here. And this is one of the state engineer's office stations at Douglas. And as you can see, this orange line here shows this is 32 Fahrenheit. So any of these dips down here are where the frost has started appearing in the soil. And as you can see, over the last month or so, we've been dipping down at least at night and then coming back up to up above freezing. But we've been getting these nighttime dips down below 32 in the top levels of the soil. And now we're going to start seeing this 8-inch one here drop below freezing here probably fairly soon. And this translates to a frost depth map that we're putting together. This again for Douglas, that looks something like this. And this is the lowest one that we've seen here, where we got down, had a frost depth dip down to about a little over 7.5 inches this morning. And this is a map we're starting to put together with a combination of the Upper Missouri stations, the state engineer's office stations, and a few other cooperators, part of the Wyoming Mesonet. And you can see this is showing frost depths. This was at 8 o'clock this morning. The state engineer's office new station here at Boulder got a frost depth of over 12.5 inches. Hart Mountain and Powell, about 3 inches this morning. Douglas, about 7.5. Elk Mountain, 5. These will pop up pretty close to the freezing mark by the time we get through the afternoon, but then start dipping down again at night. And this is just another way of looking at it, sort of a poker chip stack of the various temperatures for the depths, and sort of warmer colors as you get down deeper, as you would expect. But just wanted to give you a little idea of what we're looking at now as far as putting out soil moisture and soil temperature products here. And let's move on now just to take a look at what where we're at as far as the drought picture. From our last webinar, the area of the state with this D1 to D4 went up a little over 4.5%. You can see we had a a little bit of dip there where we had some of the abnormally dry kicking in, but we're losing that again. And again, the extreme drought has stepped up a little bit here. So we're continuing on sort of in the fashion that we were. And this is just taking a look at the last almost 2 years now. It starts at January 1st of 2020, and it gives you a little bit better resolution of where things are at. We're starting to dip down a little bit here after October. Some of the snows there kind of improve things throughout the state a little bit, at least as far as terms of the amount of area of the extreme drought. But here in the last week in November or so, we started to pop up a little bit. We're a little bit lower than we were last year at this time, but the difference is not too substantial in the extreme. And when you look at the severe, we're actually a little bit higher in terms of area than we were last year at this time. So we're looking at this continuing for a little bit more. And with that, I will now turn it over to Jim Fahey with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and he's going to give us an update on the snowpack and where we're at there. Jim?
Thanks, Tony. Hi, everybody. I'm Jim Fahey, hydrologist here at NRCS in Casper. Been in Wyoming for, 18 years now. So it's going to be my 18th, 19th runoff coming up. And first of all, there's our website on the top right there. It's the National Water Climate Center where you can see and get all your data and reports. They have done an overhaul of the website. So I've had some difficulty finding some stuff, finally did, but I will, on the chat, I'll put my email address and cell phone just in case throughout the season or whatever you need. If you can't find anything, just give me a holler and I'll try to direct you to the right place. As far as the snow water equivalents, Tony touched upon it a little bit. Looking at the last 2 years, 2021, as you can see the pretty colors there, we're in a lot of the yellows and browns, so we're still below percent of median, and statewide we're about 66% of median. And then you compare that to last year at 71% of median. And there are some areas, as you can see, have improved, and it goes with the drought monitor. You can see the areas that have not improved or gone down, especially that northwest corner of the state, in the northern part of the state. We have seen some improvement in the southern part of the state and the central part of the state, but you know, it's minimal, but it will take what we can get. Okay, next one. And this is just a raster, looking at this in a raster from the no risk analysis. I look at this one pretty tight every time I do any kind of analysis. And then again, comparing last year at this time versus this year at this time. Looking at the spatial variability, we have, like, the green looks like we have this year, the Green Basin, Wind River Range there looks a little bit higher amount of snow. And then if you look at the northwest corner again, compared to last year, there's a lot less snow and lower snow water equivalents. And it's pretty much a wash for the rest of the state for the Bighorns and the Uintas and the upper North Platte area. So, okay, next one. This, I just wanted to show you how fast it can change in Wyoming if you are new to the state or new to analyzing hydrological conditions with snow water equivalent. This is the 2016, as you can see, the middle of the month, and then look at the end of the month and the comparison of how fast it changed, especially in the northwest part of the state. Much higher snow water equivalents and much higher quantity. And then our runoff that year was the 6th highest in 120 years of data. That was pretty, unprecedented year. It doesn't happen is it going to happen this year? Probably not, but it does change. And most of the changes around here, especially east of the Continental Divide, you'll see in the spring. So this was abnormal because we had a high snowpack even east of the Divide in December. So that was pretty unprecedented. Okay, Tony, next one. And then I was doing a study on ENSO and the runoff in Wyoming, and I found using 1991 and 2021 USGS data for percentiles, and then I studied, as you can see on the bottom, the 1951 to 2021. Overall, you can see that different color codes for different ENSOs, La Nina, El Nino, and neutrals cycles. Found out overall, all basins that when we saw greater than 90% of median SWE or snowpack, we saw that 80% of all the El Nino study I studied those from 1979 to 2021 with snowtail. That's the most accurate or reasonable snowtail data that we had. And as you can see, I mean, you have a lot of years in El Nino that are top 70 to 80% percentile, but you also have, on the opposite end, the El Nino, you have a lot of years that are low, like last year, 2021, and then the 2000s and 2007, 8. They were pretty low, so it's really chaotic. I mean, even look at the El Ninos. You had some high years, and you had some really dry years. Same with the neutral. So it's still, I don't know, the jury's still out. I think El Nino is not a really strong signature, and so you can't really put your finger on whether it's La Nina or El Nino and neutral are going to be how it's going to produce your eventual runoff. Of course, with runoff in the Intermountain West, it's all about timing and parameters, which one's going to prevail during the springtime, the temperature, the rain on snow melt, etc. And as you can see, last year, 2020, this previous year, like 2021, was a La Nina. We were pretty low. It was like, I think we were only 55% of runoff, of normal runoff, or that we received this past runoff. And then I guess we have another La Nina for this winter and spring. Hopefully we can get maybe an average, a little bit above average runoff, maybe above 50 percentile, but a lot can happen from now until spring. So I'll turn it over back to Tony.
Thanks, Jim. And now we come up with Aaron Fiaschetti with the USGS to talk to us about surface water.
Aaron, I think you need to push *6 to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
All right, it's been some technical difficulties on my end, but all right, it's working now. So I'm Aaron Fiaschetti here with the USGS, and just going to be a brief update this time, as we have a lot less data than normal. So here's the current conditions here as of today, and you see a lot of gray circles on the map, and that means the measurements not available, probably because of ice or seasonal. It was a seasonal gauge, so we have less data available because a lot of those sites are coming into ice and probably will stay in ice for the coming months. But what we do see is, what this is showing you, those dots, the green is the normal, that's the 25th to 75th percentile. The orange is below normal, the 10 to 24th, and then some much below normal, those are the darker reds. And we have one that shows an all-time low, and I believe that is Snake River above Jackson Lake for today. So pretty limited data, but what we see on the map tends to be in that normal flow range for the winter, which tends to be a low base flow. Next slide, please. So this is a trend for the last 45 days. We have approximately 140 stream gauges in Wyoming, and we're showing a percentage of stream gauges since early November, and then that's the same categories. The green represents normal, and the orange below, and the red much below. And what we see basically is not a lot has changed in the last 45 days. one thing we have seen since kind of around Thanksgiving is there's been a few more daily record lows kind of creeping in over that last couple weeks. And then that record flow for the day yesterday was that Snake River above Jackson Lake. So in general, things are pretty steady right now. That's kind of what we would expect coming into base flow. We hope most of the precipitation is falling as snow and not really running off into the rivers. The next slide, please, Tony. So just compared to last month, you're seeing a lot of those blank circles in rivers and ice. We've seen a little bit of an improvement kind of in that west central area, a few more green dots in the blue square there where it used to be more below normal flows. But really not much has changed. The Northwest is still dry. And, you know, if you were kind of to guess, probably a lot of the sites that aren't showing data for this month are probably pretty similar to what we saw last month. So not a lot of change. Next slide, Tony. So just kind of poking around at a couple gauges where we do have data for today. Here's the North Fork of the Shoshone. Just kind of see that kind of hanging here in November and December into that normal flow conditions as we slowly decrease into winter base flow. So probably expect that to continue on a similar trend for the next month or so. So things look pretty reasonable there. Next slide, please. Here at the Little Wind River near Riverton, coming into October, we saw a bump in flow from rain or melting snow, and then just kind of a general trend here in normal conditions as we come into early December. So similar there, where we expect that the flow to decrease with time as we come into the winter and probably stay about where it is as far as in normal conditions. And then the next slide, please. And then here, the Snake River, highly managed flows on the river, seeing that flow kind of hang right in that below normal, that 10 to 24th percentile. It's been kept pretty low for whatever reason by the river managers there as we come into the winter, and we'll kind of see that continue to decrease depending on what the dam operators have in store there for the river, but it continues to be low there on the Snake River. And one more slide, please, Tony. So here's the teacup diagram for the reservoirs in Wyoming, comparing what we had today to last month. And in reality, there hasn't been any really significant changes in reservoir contents. There has been some minor increases or decreases in storage since mid-November, but with flows continuing to be kind of coming into base flows and not a lot of runoff occurring right now, that storage levels haven't changed. I'm sure there could be a minor exception there, but from what I could tell, that not much has changed here in the last month. So that concludes what I have to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. And now we have Jared Allen with the National Weather Service in Cheyenne, who's going to talk about weather forecasts and outlooks.
Great, thanks, Tony. If you want to go ahead to the next slide, that'd be great. So for the next 7-day quantitative precipitation forecast, again, that long, arduous word, quantitative precipitation forecast, just means the liquid water equivalent of the snow that we're anticipating over the next week. So some good news, some bad news. The good news is in the higher terrain of the wind and the Laramie ranges in the higher terrain up there towards Teton and Park counties do look to be receiving some decent amounts of snow, actually ongoing today into tomorrow and then a little bit later into this week. The unfortunate news is the higher plains and lower valleys does not look to really get too much precipitation in those gray areas or even light green areas at the moment. The snowies in the Sierra Madres in the south, the higher terrain, say above 85 to 9,000 feet, should make out a little bit better. But unfortunately, this overall forecast does not look too promising for any drought relief going forward. So drier conditions are anticipated over the weekend into early next week, but again, mountain snow is ongoing over the next 48 to 72 hours before we get into the weekend. Unfortunately, it does look like it's going to be another windier period coming up late week into the weekend that may assist with additional evapotranspiration that could dry out some more of the soils a little bit too. Next slide, please. And looking forward, we got in the next 6 to 10 day outlook, a little bit of a bisection of below to near normal and then above components for the state of Wyoming. The further north you are in the state, the more likely you will be of being basically favored to be near normal and barely below normal. But basically, a vast majority of the state is favored to be above normal in the 6 to 10 day time frame. Looking at the precipitation outlook, a little bit of some good news here, especially if you're on the western slopes and western side. That's going to be favored for slightly higher precipitation, slightly above normal the further east, about average to barely a little bit more Christmas and after. Next slide, please. And then just beyond that, so basically Christmas right into the end of the year near January 1st. Still kind of that same pattern farther north, a little bit more favored to be near normal to slightly below normal. Pretty strong signal there for southern Canada and the northern central plains. But again, the central and south portions of the state, further to Colorado and Nebraska, favored to be at or slightly above normal for that part of the state. And then at the end, bringing in the end of the year, kind of the same pattern overall. Again, the western portions of the state are favored to be a little bit above normal precipitation wise. So that is some welcome news. Always good to see some green on the map for sure for us. Next slide, please. And then just kind of reiterating a little bit of what Jim and Aaron have kind of highlighted a little bit, looking at some of the snowtail snapshots across the state. You do have some greens in there, which are near median to barely above, but you kind of see a good mixture of the yellow and then orange and even some reds, which certainly is showcasing the components that Jim from the NRCS was highlighting with those basins being at or below normal. So these are the sites that go into some of those quantities, and the Laramie range not doing too great in the south and southeast. The snowies are doing okay in some spots with a few greens. Sierra Madre is a little worse shape. Depending on where you are in the winds, it's okay, but less, especially the further west you go. It's definitely less there. The Bighorns are actually probably the best mountain range in shape overall at the moment, but we'll have to see how that trends over the next month. And if you go one more, I've just taken a few snapshots of the Laramie Mountain Range and the Bighorn Range for those images. So these are the snowtail sites. The first one's there at Crow Creek, and the black line is the current amount of snow water equivalent there. So we're pushing near minimums, and I've even overlaid what happened last year, and you can see how low last year was. So we're kind of tracking pretty well for the southeast Laramie Mountains as what occurred last year, and hopefully we can try and add to that a little bit over the next month or so, but not looking too promising until after the first of the year. For the Bighorn Range, it's a little bit better, as was shared on the previous image. It's running a little bit higher than last year, which is that other line that you see just below it. So it's running about normal at this time. And then if you want to advance one more, I'll turn it over to the next presenter.
And that next presenter is Wendy Kelly with the UW Extension and also the USDA Northern Plains Climate Hub to talk to us about getting involved.
Great, thanks, Jared and Tony. So I would like to start out with just recapping where we are as of this morning on the US Drought Monitor Map. As Tony indicated at the beginning of the webinar, we've seen some improvements in the state as well as some degradations since our last webinar in November. And we really like to set up on the webinar to explain why the drought monitor looks the way it does based on current conditions and then the outlook. So again, this is a map that was released this morning. There are a couple of ways that we like to remind folks that you can get involved with helping us understand what the conditions are throughout the state. One way is to volunteer to be a CoCoRaHS citizen scientist, where you report precipitation, ideally on a daily basis at your location. And that goes into a database that we can pull from. And you can see the map on the left is the map from this morning from about 7 o'clock and the number of folks that reported precipitation. It's important to enter the zeros as well. If you don't enter anything, then it shows up as no data. On the right, you can see the different stations throughout the state of Wyoming. So quite a few gaps, and with the variability of how precipitation falls, it's important to try and fill in those gaps. So there is a role for you. And if you have questions about the CoCoRaHS program, feel free to reach out to Tony Bergantino or myself, and we're happy to answer those questions. Next slide. Another way that you can get involved is through the Condition Monitoring Observer Report System, also called CMOR Reports. And in this system, you can report conditions from severely dry to severely wet. So this is all conditions. You can report conditions and impacts for crops, livestock, household, among others. This is really helpful for us to understand what's going on the ground and how it's changing. You can see that the map on the right, this is for Wyoming. And I looked this morning, and the last report that was submitted for Wyoming was on September 29th. So definitely encourage folks to continue to use the CMOR system. We look at this pretty much weekly to see if there's any new reports, any kind of flags being raised of areas that we need to kind of cross-check or see if it aligns with what we're seeing in the data. So do encourage you to use this as well as to share it with others. A couple of other points on the CMOR system is that you can submit photos to the database. We do encourage comparison photos to make it easier for us to tell the difference between a more dry year versus a normal or a wet year. You're familiar with a pasture or a water source, and we're not as familiar with it and what it should look like during a normal year or a wet year. So comparison photos are really helpful and that are taken about the same time of year. Also, regular reporting is helpful. I encourage folks to try and submit a report on the 1st or the 15th or whatever day of the month works best for you to help to have some consistency. The last point I want to make is that these reports and photos are available to the public. So it is a public record that anybody can access. And I just like to bring that to your attention as well. Tony had highlighted the bit.ly link up above where you can submit these reports. Next slide, please. So I want to thank each of the presenters for today. And you can see their names, their affiliation, as well as their email addresses on the slide. And then I also want to highlight the Wyoming Drought Information and Resources website that we put together this year in response of people looking for drought information. There's also the CoCoRaHS link if you're interested in becoming a citizen scientist, reporting precipitation or lack of, and then the CMOR as well. So with that, I want to thank each of you for attending the December webinar, and we will get ready to take any questions that you might have.